Statistician General of South Africa, or Stats SA, I should say, South Africa, says the Western Cape municipalities continue to lead the rest of the country on selected aspects of service delivery, such as access to free basics, including sewerage and sanitation. Releasing the results last week, Stats SA Deputy Director General Joe De Beer quoted the 2019 Non-Financial Census of Municipalities, providing data on service delivery, poor households and bucket toilets. According to NFCM, estimates that the Western Cape showed the highest proportion of consumer units that benefited from free basic sewerage and sanitation at 47.9%. Cilliers Brink, DA Shadow Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, joins us now to talk about this. Good to have you, Cilliers. Thanks for joining us on the programme.
Good morning, Leanne. Good to be with you.
So the timing of these Stats SA results coincided, of course, with the release of the 2019-2020 audits by the Auditor General, basically showing that the Western Cape attained 70% clean audits of the work audited. Let's just get to the basics of how does the Western Cape ensure consistency like this over the years?
Well, it's important to note that the Western Cape is different in one key aspect from most of the rest of the country, and that is that voters decided to vote for a different political party. So even before I tell you how good the DA is, it's a very important experiment for communities to try something different. And in places outside of the Western Cape, this has also happened. So you've spoken to Bongani Baloyi, the DA mayor of Midvaal, and the same recipe that he has used to ensure excellent services, good financial management, value for ratepayers' money, is the recipe that the successful DA-run municipalities in the Western Cape have done. Ensure that money is well spent, employ the best people for the job, eschew practices of cadre deployment, and focus on the core tasks of service delivery. So it is, local government has got big problems, and many of them come from national legislation. So even in the Western Cape, municipalities run under the burden of many national issues, but they try their best. And I think, good leadership, strong management, getting the basics right, as Bongani Baloyi has done in Midvaal, is the recipe for success.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I must say, we had a fabulous conversation with him last week, just getting an idea as to what it is that he does and how it's managed to, that particular municipality with him as mayor has managed to get these clean audits all these years in a row. Your choice of word just got to me, though, that voters should experiment, or they should try, because this is the problem. It's this word experiment, and I think that this is a difficult one to swallow at the moment, especially after what Tony Leon came out saying in his book about black leaders and experimenting with Mmusi Maimane. And this is one of the problems. It doesn't really matter, unfortunately, when you look at the DA, and they may be getting these clean audits, but it is a problem when news headlines like this come in, and this kind of shadows the good work that you may be doing. How does it feel for you when you read things like this? You know you can do the job, but unfortunately, it's just this inherent racism that still exists that may scare off a lot of voters.
Well, I certainly can't speak on behalf of Tony Leon what he meant in the context of his book. As I read his remarks, what he was mentioning, the experiment was electing a leader that had never previously supported the DA and in fact had voted for the ANC at the last election. There was absolutely no reference to race, but be that as it may, I'm sure Tony is perfectly capable of defending himself on this count. I think that the DA offers hope in the sense that good government benefits the whole of the community. It doesn't really matter whether the head of electricity of a municipality represents the demography, racial or otherwise, of that community. What's important is that he keeps the lights on, and that things function properly, and that ratepayers get value for their money. There is something called a shared South African interest that does not come in color codes, but affects all of us. And I think the DA is the party for the shared South African interests. And we've got representatives and excellent DA leaders, whether it be Bongani Baloyi in Midvaal, or some of our other mayors in the Western Cape and even some in the metros that are taking the lead, and they don't represent a particular community. They represent shared South African interests. And you know, Leanne, as things become more and more difficult, as local government across the country deteriorates, things fall apart. There are water crises, electricity crises. We really need all of the skills and the leadership that we can muster. And I think that's what puts the DA's offer apart from other parties.
Yeah, and you know, this is another issue to debate. I wish we had more time, but I am already looking at the time, and we sort of in constraints, because I really would like to debate you on this whole issue of race and everything that comes in when we do automatically talk, and that, you know, when you say it doesn't really matter where the service comes from, whether it be a white service provider or a black service provider, as long as you're getting good service. I think that in the South African perspective, that may be a difficult and hard pill to swallow, because when you do look at some of the areas, and also in the Western Cape, particularly the areas that are mainly inhabited by black citizens within your province, compared to those that are populated by white citizens in the more affluent areas, you can almost see the perception that it looks like service delivery is much better in some areas as opposed to others. How do we explain that, and how do we get to the bottom of something like that?
I think it's very important to note that the DA nor the Western Cape government has ever said that things are perfect in the Western Cape. As I mentioned at the beginning, Western Cape municipalities operate under the same constraints as the rest of the country, economy that isn't growing, the inequities of the past. But the important point is that the Western Cape and DA-run municipalities outside of the Western Cape is making the most of very bad circumstances. So the statistics that you quoted at the beginning deals with levels of service delivery across the board, not just for the wealthy, not just for the middle class, but basic things: access to running water, access to sanitation. So nobody is saying that the Western Cape is perfect, that there isn't poverty and economic issues in the Western Cape. But I think the important point is, what do you do with limited resources? And I think it's clear that the level of standards and the level of basic services experienced by everybody in the Western Cape is much higher than the rest of the country. And a basic test for that is to see how many people come to the Western Cape in hope of a job, of a better future, of enjoying better basic amenities. And every year, thousands and thousands of people come to the Western Cape. And I think that in itself is a vote of confidence, especially from poor South Africans, especially from working class South Africans in hope of a better future.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously we look to some of the municipalities that do very, very well, and we have highlighted them. But I mean, let's also look at some of the municipalities that necessarily didn't do well under the DA leadership. I mean, let's look at Tshwane, some of those issues that developed there, and some of the squabbles and the dodgy deals under the DA leadership, also within the Western Cape. And as you say, I mean, it certainly isn't perfect, but these things also need to be explained. And you know, saying that life is much better under a DA-led government is perhaps a far-reaching statement to make.
So it's a little bit unfair to compare Tshwane after a few years of DA government with the Western Cape and Cape Town that has had 10, 15 years of DA government. But even in the case of Tshwane, the DA inherited that city with a 2 billion rand deficit, with a string of corrupt and irregular contracts, where we had to approach the courts to get out of those contracts, with city administration, with deployed cadres, almost 900 people working in the office of the mayor alone, doing heavens know what. And within a few short months, there were significant improvements in Tshwane. Things weren't perfect, but the deficit was turned around. The number of political staff were reduced. And it is through the political interference of the Gauteng government that last year the city of Tshwane was placed under administration for a period of about 10 months. It was eventually overturned by a court, but the end result of that is that all of the gains, especially the financial gains that the DA had made, were wiped out. And now Tshwane has its democratically elected mayor back again, only with the disadvantage for the period that the ANC Gauteng government was in charge, that things were torn apart again. So, we have to look at these experiments of democracy in the sense of taking a chance on a different option. And things won't change overnight, but the accumulated effect of years and years of effort, of different management, can be seen in places such as Midvaal and many Western Cape municipalities. So yes, Tshwane isn't where it's meant to be, and the same is true of Port Elizabeth, another city, or Nelson Mandela Bay, another city where DA control was thwarted for a while. But, one has to ask, what state would those cities have been in had the DA not taken over in 2016?
All right. I'm going to ask you, Cilliers, if you don't mind, just to stay on. Are you available to chat to us further at about 8:10, just to also talk? Because as much as I want to still continue to talk about this, there's very important models and questions that you asked the COGTA department, and all talking about municipalities and some of the experts that are going to be deployed there. So would you mind staying on just for a couple more minutes so we can chat to you on SABC News?
I'm happy.
Excellent.
So.
All right. Thanks very much, Cilliers. So this, unfortunately, is where we have to say goodbye to our SABC2 viewers. And I do say unfortunately because I think that there's a lot more to come in this interview, but we'll continue it just after the news at 8 o'clock.
Indeed, we shall. So we'll see you again tomorrow on SABC.